Hey guys, tonight we're voyaging into the heart of an ancient city where the horizon itself seemed to float. Picture it now. You're standing on a wooden dock, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and wet reeds. Around you, an intricate maze of canals stretches as far as the eye can see, dotted with verdant islands that seem to hover just above the water. Welcome to Tenochtitlan, the capital of the mighty Aztec Empire, a city so alive with vibrant colors and rich sounds that it almost feels unreal. But there's something else, something that ties this entire city together in an almost magical way: its floating gardens. You probably won't survive this ancient city without a good pair of shoes or at least some sturdy sandals. But don't worry, no one here expects you to be running anywhere. You're in the heart of the Aztec Empire, and it's a world where beauty and practicality exist in perfect harmony, almost like an ancient version of Pinterest made real. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you are tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always love hearing where my viewers are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In Tenochtitlan, everything had its place, and floating in the very center of this watery cityscape were the Chinampas. Imagine rows of small, artificial islands that seemed to defy the laws of nature. They floated on the surface of the lakes, rising and falling with the water, as if the earth had decided it wanted to float too. These floating gardens weren't some whimsical invention, though. They were an agricultural masterpiece, a way of growing food in an environment that, at first glance, didn't seem to be conducive to farming at all. It's almost as though the Aztecs looked at the water and said, "We can make this work." At their core, Chinampas were ingenious, built from the muck of the lake bed and reinforced by reeds. Each garden was carefully crafted, layer by layer. First, the Aztecs would sink stakes into the lake bed, forming a grid that would define the boundaries of each island. Then they piled mud and plant material on top of this framework, creating a platform that could support crops. Over time, these islands became fertile and incredibly productive, as if the Aztecs had found a way to harness the very energy of the water beneath them. And it wasn't just about growing food. These floating gardens were vital to the very survival of the city. With its population booming, Tenochtitlan needed a reliable source of food, and the Chinampas provided just that. As much as they were symbols of agricultural innovation, they were also a testament to the Aztecs' remarkable ability to adapt to their environment. Historians still argue whether the creation of Chinampas was entirely the brainchild of the Aztecs, or whether they inherited this technique from earlier Mesoamerican civilizations. Some suggest the Olmecs or the Maya might have had a hand in this agricultural revolution, but no one really knows for sure. What is certain is that the Aztecs perfected it, turning it into an art form that not only fed their people, but also played a huge role in their economy. So, next time you hear someone complain about having to water their garden, think about the Aztecs. They didn't have the luxury of modern irrigation systems, yet they managed to grow crops that thrived on floating islands. It's a bit like watching your grandmother make a 5-course meal with just a few ingredients. It's almost magical how they made it all work. Now that you've caught a glimpse of the city and the floating islands that were part of its lifeblood, let's take a deeper look at the very birth of the Chinampas themselves. Imagine, if you will, a vast body of water, lacustrine, calm, and full of potential. The lake could have easily been seen as a barrier to life, but instead, the Aztecs viewed it as an opportunity. It was as if they saw the water not as an obstacle, but as the perfect canvas upon which to paint a vibrant agricultural masterpiece. The idea for Chinampas didn't just come out of nowhere, though. The Aztecs were born into a land that was at once rich in resources, but also full of challenges. The region around Tenochtitlan was swampy, with lake systems that could be hard to navigate. But this made it perfect for Chinampas, since these fertile waters provided the perfect base for growing crops that could feed their growing population. What you might find surprising is that the very foundation of the Chinampas came from the earth itself, the lake bed. The Aztecs would actually dredge up mud from the bottom of the lakes, piling it onto wooden frames made from reeds, willows, and other plants. These mud islands were left to settle over time, and the organic material in the water would help them grow lush with crops. It's almost like the Aztecs created their own little ecosystems, miniature fertile patches floating on the water, all carefully cultivated to maximize food production. There was a method to all of this too. The construction process was far from a quick task. It required precision, skill, and knowledge of the land. The Aztecs would plant rows of trees like willows and poplars along the edges of the Chinampas, their roots digging deep into the water and acting as natural anchors for the islands. Some historians argue that these trees were an early example of the Aztecs' sustainable approach to agriculture, while others believe that they helped improve water quality around the gardens, creating a small but perfect ecological zone. But just as we talk about the ingenuity of the Chinampas' construction, it's impossible not to mention how incredibly labor-intensive these gardens were to maintain. The land had to be nurtured constantly, flooded and drained at the right times to keep the crops growing without drowning them. The best crops for the Chinampas were those that thrived in wet conditions, like maize, beans, and squash. Historians often joke that the Aztecs had to work like aquatic farmers, making sure the water levels were always just right. And then there's the quirky part. Did you know that these floating islands didn't just grow food? They were sometimes used for growing flowers, too. Yes, flowers. Specifically, flowers like the red, yellow, and pink marigolds that had a dual purpose. Not only were they used for ceremonial purposes, but they also helped with pollination, making the whole system even more efficient. If you look at it this way, these gardens were not just a source of food. They were a symbolic representation of life, death, and rebirth, intertwined in an ever-growing cycle. Historians still argue about the precise role of flowers in the Chinampas. Were they truly just ornamental, or did they have a practical purpose in aiding crop production? Some scholars believe they were symbolic, an offering to the gods. Others feel they were part of an intricate agricultural system that the Aztecs designed to work in harmony with nature. It's this level of complexity and debate that makes the Aztec agricultural system so fascinating. Nothing was ever just one thing. And so, as the Chinampas grew from simple, floating mud islands into fully fledged agricultural marvels, they stood as a testament to the Aztecs' innovative spirit. This was a civilization that wasn't just surviving on a lake, but thriving in ways no one had ever imagined. In fact, these floating gardens were so successful that they eventually became an iconic feature of Tenochtitlan, making it one of the most well-planned and visually stunning cities of its time. Let's now take a step back and truly appreciate the genius behind the Chinampa structure. If you've ever found yourself watching a water lily bobbing peacefully on a pond, you might begin to get a sense of how the Chinampas function. But imagine a floating garden that stretched for miles, organized in an intricate grid, each island alive with crops, flowers, and trees. It wasn't just about piling dirt onto water. It was about creating a system, a well-oiled machine designed to produce food, create beauty, and even maintain ecological balance. The first thing to understand about the Chinampa structure is that it wasn't a single layered creation. It was a multi-tiered system built over time, designed to improve fertility, conserve water, and maximize the area available for growing. At the bottom of the Chinampa, the lake's mud provided the foundation, rich in nutrients and organic material. The Aztecs then added layers of reeds, grasses, and even decaying plants to help hold the structure together. These layers acted like natural sponges, soaking up water and making the Chinampas ideal for crops that thrived in wet conditions. The more you think about it, the more you realize just how smart this system was. The floating islands were perfectly adapted to their environment. The lake was both the source of life and the medium of growth. Water could easily be added or drained depending on the season, and crops would be rotated between the various Chinampas to avoid depleting the soil. This careful balance between agriculture and the natural world is a hallmark of the Aztecs' ingenuity. But there's more to this. In addition to creating fertile land where there once was water, the Aztecs also harnessed the natural movements of the lake to their advantage. Chinampas were built in such a way that the movement of water actually helped improve their fertility. As the water rose and fell, it naturally deposited more nutrients and organic matter on the islands, a process that would be nearly impossible to replicate today without modern technology. One of the most amazing aspects of these floating gardens was their size. The largest chinampas could be up to 30 meters long and 2 to 4 meters wide, big enough to sustain entire families, yet small enough to float on the water. It's almost like the Aztecs were creating miniature islands in the middle of a massive lake. And despite their size, these gardens could be easily expanded, connected by a network of canals that would allow goods and people to move freely between the islands and the rest of the city. Historians still argue whether the chinampas were purely utilitarian or whether they served a symbolic role as well. Some believe they were more than just agricultural tools, serving as a kind of metaphor for life in Tenochtitlan itself. After all, the Aztecs viewed their empire as a divine creation, and it's possible that the chinampas, floating as they did, were meant to symbolize the harmony between human effort and the natural world. Others, however, argue that the practical benefits of these gardens far outweighed any symbolic importance, and that the real focus was on the food production they provided. The beauty of the chinampas lies in their dual nature. They were both practical and symbolic, living proof of the Aztecs' ability to merge ingenuity with spirituality. They created not just a way of growing food, but a whole system that allowed their society to flourish on the waters of Lake Texcoco. It's also important to recognize that these gardens weren't just isolated. Each chinampa was part of a greater urban design that made Tenochtitlan one of the most extraordinary cities in the ancient world. A city that was arranged meticulously with canals, bridges, temples, and bustling markets. Every element, from the urban layout to the food supply, was interconnected, creating an almost perfect ecosystem. So next time you think about the word garden, imagine something a little more impressive than your backyard flower bed. Think of an entire agricultural landscape, floating on a lake, sustained by the skill and dedication of an ancient people who mastered the art of farming like no one else. Now that we've explored the foundational mechanics behind the chinampas, let's zoom out a little and examine the bigger picture, how these floating islands fit into the broader fabric of Tenochtitlan itself. Picture this, a sprawling, water-bound metropolis with canals winding through the heart of the city, bringing life and commerce into every corner. Floating right in the middle of this aquatic labyrinth were the chinampas, meticulously placed to serve a very specific purpose, not just in agriculture, but in the daily life of the Aztecs. In Tenochtitlan, everything had its place: buildings, markets, temples, and of course the canals. Canals were the lifeblood of this city, running through the entire urban expanse. The Aztecs used these waterways for transportation, irrigation, and even waste disposal, making the city's infrastructure as complex as any modern city. But the canals weren't just practical. They were integral to the entire ecosystem of Tenochtitlan, allowing the chinampas to thrive and integrate seamlessly into urban life. The canals themselves were a work of art, engineered with precision. They weren't just random water passages. They were carefully planned to ensure the movement of water was steady and controllable. Water levels were regulated throughout the year, allowing the chinampas to remain stable, even as seasons shifted and rainfall varied. The Aztecs were experts in managing water flow. They built dikes and levees around their lakes to prevent flooding and to control water levels, which was key for ensuring that the chinampas wouldn't drown or dry out. This mastery of water engineering allowed them to sustain their crops year-round, creating a reliable food source for their ever-growing population. You might be thinking, okay, but how did they actually navigate this maze of water? Well, the Aztecs weren't just passive residents of a city built on water. They were active participants in its flow. They used small boats called tlacuelos to navigate the canals, and it wasn't uncommon for families living on the chinampas to own their own small craft. These boats were used to transport goods, water, and sometimes even people. But the canals weren't just for transportation. They also acted as barriers, preventing unwanted guests or enemy invaders from sneaking into the city. The bustling canals weren't just functional. They were also places of social life. Picture the vibrant marketplaces that would pop up along the water's edge, with vendors calling out to passing boats, selling everything from food to textiles to pottery and jewelry. The movement of people and goods was constant, and the canals were the arterial highways that kept the city alive. If you'd walk through the streets of Tenochtitlan, It would have felt like a combination of a busy market, a waterway, and an agricultural field, seamlessly interconnected. But there was a deeper significance to this. The canals were more than just transportation routes. They were the arteries of the city, carrying life from the floating islands into the urban heart. The Aztecs were able to use the water to move goods from one part of the city to another, allowing the Chinampas to supply their crops directly to the markets. This system of distribution was remarkably efficient, enabling the Aztecs to feed thousands of people every day. Historians still debate how the canal system was constructed and whether it was designed from the very beginning, or if it evolved over time as the city grew. Some believe that the canals were simply a response to the geographical challenges of living on a lake, while others argue that they were part of a grand urban design meant to symbolize the Aztecs' relationship with the gods and nature. The complexity of the system suggests it was both a practical solution to living on a lake and a reflection of the Aztecs' spiritual beliefs. The canals also provided the perfect setting for the Chinampas to not only grow food, but to grow social relationships. After all, in such a bustling, water-bound city, food production wasn't just about nourishment. It was a cornerstone of daily life and interaction. As the Chinampas flourished, so did the social fabric of Tenochtitlan. And every boat ride along the canal was not just a journey through a city. It was a journey through a culture that thrived on the careful balance between human ingenuity and the natural world. And let's not forget, the canals themselves were teeming with life. Waterfowl, fish, and amphibians all played their roles in this delicate ecosystem. Imagine, as you glide through these canals, you'd see ducks paddling by, their quacking mixing with the soft lapping of the water against the boats. The entire scene, alive with the sounds of the water, the scent of fresh produce, the clamor of vendors, was like a living organism in its own right, thriving off the careful, thoughtful balance the Aztecs created. As we continue our exploration of Tenochtitlan, let's focus on the day-to-day life of the people who tended these floating gardens. We've talked about the grand design and the clever mechanics of the Chinampas, but what was it really like for the people who worked on these islands? Picture it now. You've just stepped onto one of these lush, green islands, the earth beneath your feet slightly damp from the cool waters that surround it. The air is thick with the earthy smell of wet soil, and the sound of water lapping against the edges is soothing. There's a faint buzz of activity, people planting, harvesting, and moving about with purpose. The life of a Chinampa farmer was far from easy, but it was certainly rewarding. These were not simply people tending small garden plots for personal use. They were agricultural specialists, ensuring that the crops grown on the Chinampas could feed the entire city. The primary crops grown on these floating gardens were maize, beans, and squash, known as the Mesoamerican triad, the foundation of Aztec nutrition. But beyond that, Chinampas also grew tomatoes, chili peppers, amaranth, and even flowers, like the marigolds we mentioned earlier. Everything from food to medicine to ceremonial items could be cultivated on these fertile islands. The work was constant. To keep the Chinampas healthy and productive, the Aztec farmers had to ensure the water levels were maintained, the soil enriched, and the crops rotated. Flooding and draining the land at the right times was essential for keeping the crops alive without drowning them. And the farming cycle was governed by the seasons, the moon, and the movement of the waters. A key figure in the Chinampa economy was the Chinampa farmer, also known as the Tlaquilo. These farmers didn't just maintain the land, they were also responsible for the intricate knowledge that made the Chinampas so productive. They knew when to plant, when to harvest, and how to work in harmony with the water levels. They were the masters of their craft, combining practical knowledge with a deep respect for the land. It's easy to imagine them working from dawn until dusk, moving between islands in small canoes, paddling through the canals with ease as they checked on their crops and ensured that everything was growing as it should. Yet it wasn't just about growing food. The Chinampa farmers were also deeply connected to the spiritual aspects of their work. For the Aztecs, agriculture wasn't a mundane task. It was an act of reverence. The Aztecs believed that the gods were present in every part of nature, and farming was a way of showing respect and gratitude for the gifts the gods had provided. Many of the Chinampa farmers would make offerings to the gods of fertility, like Tlaloc, the rain god, to ensure a good harvest. There's even evidence that some farmers built small shrines on their chinampas, dedicating their work to the gods and asking for divine intervention in times of need. Historians still debate just how involved religion was in the day-to-day activities of the Chinampa farmers. Some believe that the Aztecs' spiritual beliefs were deeply integrated into their farming practices, while others argue that agriculture was mostly practical, with religion only playing a secondary role. Regardless, it's clear that the farmers' work was never just about food. It was about life, death, and a cycle of growth that mirrored the rhythms of the universe itself. On these islands, it wasn't uncommon to see the farmers working together, each person taking on a different role. Some were harvesting crops, while others were maintaining the waterways or planting new seeds. The work was a community effort, with everyone playing a part in ensuring that the Chinampas thrive. And while the work could be physically demanding, there was also a sense of camaraderie among the people, a shared understanding that they were working together to feed the city and sustain their way of life. But of course, it wasn't just about hard work. Life on the Chinampas had its pleasures too. Imagine sitting back at the end of a long day, watching the sunset over the lake, the sky painting itself in shades of pink and orange, while the sound of frogs and insects fills the air. For the people living on the Chinampas, these moments of peace were just as important as the work itself. Life on the floating gardens was a delicate balance between labor, spirituality, and the beauty of the world around them. Historians still argue whether life on the Chinampas was as idyllic as it sounds, or whether it was a grueling and exhausting existence. Some argue that it was a life of labor, with farmers working tirelessly to ensure the success of the gardens, while others believe it was a life that afforded the people a certain amount of peace, living close to nature in a way that felt both sacred and fulfilling. Whatever the case may have been, life on the Chinampas was integral to the survival of Tenochtitlan, and its farmers were an essential part of the empire's success. Now that we've seen how the people lived and worked on the Chinampas, let's dive into the real payoff, the bounty of the floating gardens. If you've ever grown your own vegetables, you know how satisfying it is to pluck a ripe tomato from the vine, or to see your hard work produce something tangible. Now imagine that feeling multiplied by thousands, because that's what the Chinampas did for the Aztecs. These gardens didn't just feed a family, they fed an entire empire. The primary crops grown on the Chinampas were the staples of the Aztec diet: maize, beans, and squash. Known as the Mesoamerican Triad, these three crops formed the backbone of Aztec agriculture. Maize, in particular, was the cornerstone of the Aztec diet. It wasn't just eaten fresh. It was used in a variety of ways, ground into flour to make tortillas, tamales, and other traditional foods. Beans, with their high protein content, were the perfect complement to maize, creating a balanced and nutritious diet. And then there were the squash, which added variety and richness to meals. Together, these three crops created a system of agriculture that allowed the Aztecs to thrive in an environment that many would have considered hostile. But the Chinampas didn't stop at just maize, beans, and squash. The Aztecs grew a wide variety of other crops on these floating islands. Amaranth, a highly nutritious grain, was another important crop, providing protein and vitamins to the Aztec diet. The Chinampas also produced chili peppers, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, and even cotton for textiles. It wasn't just about feeding the people, it was about creating a self-sustaining ecosystem that could produce everything the Aztecs needed. The productivity of these floating gardens was staggering. A single Chinampa could produce multiple harvests per year, thanks to the fertile lakebed soil and the constant irrigation provided by the surrounding water. This level of productivity wasn't just impressive, it was essential for the survival of the Aztec Empire. Tenochtitlan was a bustling city, home to a population of around 200,000 people. That's a lot of mouths to feed. Without the Chinampas, the city simply couldn't have sustained itself. Historians still debate just how many Chinampas were needed to support the population of Tenochtitlan. Some believe that the Chinampas were responsible for up to 80% of the food production in the city. Others argue that the number was likely lower, but still significant enough to support the empire's population and military. Either way, it's clear that the Chinampas were a vital part of the Aztec economy, not only providing food, but also supplying goods for trade. The Aztecs were known for their bustling marketplaces, and the Chinampas played a key role in ensuring that these markets were stocked with fresh produce, textiles, and other goods. The Chinampas weren't just about agriculture. They were also a source of wealth. The crops grown on these floating gardens were traded throughout the empire, creating a thriving network of commerce. Goods from the Chinampas were sold in the markets of Tenochtitlan, and they were also exchanged with other cities and regions. The wealth generated by the Chinampas was reinvested into the city, helping to fund the construction of temples, roads, and other infrastructure. It's safe to say that the Chinampas played a pivotal role in the success of the Aztec Empire, helping to create a society that was both self-sustaining and highly prosperous. But it wasn't just about the quantity of food produced, it was also about the quality. The Aztecs didn't just grow food for survival. They grew food that was delicious, nutritious, and deeply embedded in their culture. The fruits and vegetables grown on the Chinampas were prized for their flavor and variety. The Aztecs even had a taste for the exotic, with fruits like cacao and avocados grown in certain areas, adding richness and luxury to their diet. It's clear that the Chinampas were not just a source of sustenance, they were an essential part of the Aztec way of life, providing food, trade goods, and even a sense of cultural identity. Historians still argue whether the Chinampas were entirely responsible for the success of Aztec agriculture, or whether they were simply one part of a much larger system of farming practices. Some argue that the Chinampas were the key to the empire's success, while others suggest that other agricultural techniques, such as terracing and the use of irrigation, were just as important. One thing is for sure, the Chinampas were a major factor in the Aztecs' ability to thrive in a city built on water, proving that with the right ingenuity, humans can adapt to even the most challenging environments. So, next time you bite into a fresh tomato, a slice of squash, or even a bit of avocado, think about how those foods have deep roots in the history of the Aztecs and the Chinampas that made it all possible. Now that we've explored the abundance and variety of the Chinampas, it's time to take a closer look at the ingenuity behind their agricultural methods. The Chinampas weren't just about growing food. They were about producing food with extraordinary efficiency and sustainability. The Aztecs' ability to cultivate these floating islands with such success was a direct result of their profound understanding of the natural environment, which they had honed over centuries of living in close contact with the land and water. Let's break it down. The key to the Chinampas' success was the way they were built and maintained. Remember, the floating islands were constructed using a mixture of mud from the lake bed and plant matter such as reeds and grasses. But it wasn't just about piling dirt onto water. It was about layering materials in such a way that the islands could sustain themselves and the crops grown on them. Each layer of plant matter helped retain moisture, and the organic material broke down over time to add nutrients to the soil, creating a fertile environment for crops to thrive. This sustainable approach didn't stop at just building the islands. The Aztecs had a keen understanding of crop rotation, a technique that allowed them to keep their soil healthy and avoid depletion. By rotating crops like maize, beans, and squash, the Aztecs ensured that their fields remained productive year after year. They also planted nitrogen-fixing crops like beans alongside maize, which helped replenish the soil with essential nutrients. This level of agricultural knowledge was impressive, especially considering that the Aztecs didn't have modern fertilizers or technology to rely on. Instead, they used what nature provided and worked in harmony with it. Another key element of the Chinampa system was the use of irrigation. While the lake provided a natural water source, the Aztecs had to carefully manage the water to ensure the crops received the right amount. They achieved this through a system of canals that allowed them to flood and drain the Chinampas as needed. The canals were carefully designed to regulate water flow, preventing the crops from being submerged during the rainy season, while also ensuring they received enough water during the dry months. This precise control over water management allowed the Chinampas to thrive in an environment that many would have considered unsuitable for farming. The ability to manipulate water was crucial to the success of the Chinampas, and it highlights the Aztecs' mastery of hydraulic engineering. In fact, the Aztecs were pioneers in water management, and their techniques were considered so advanced that they were studied by later civilizations. Some historians even suggest that the techniques used in the construction and maintenance of the Chinampas were a precursor to modern agricultural methods like drip irrigation and controlled flooding. The Aztecs understood that water was both a resource to be managed and a force of nature that had to be respected. But the genius of the Chinampas wasn't just about the technology. It was also about how the system worked within the larger context of Aztec society. The Chinampas were an integral part of the Aztec economy, contributing to the city's food production, trade, and cultural identity. The crops grown on the Chinampas were used to feed the people of Tenochtitlan, but they were also sold in the bustling markets of the city, helping to fuel the economy. In a society that placed great value on community and shared responsibility, the Chinampas were a symbol of the collective effort required to sustain the empire. Historians still debate how exactly the Chinampa system evolved over time. Some believe that the Aztecs gradually perfected the technique over generations, while others argue that the Chinampas were inspired by earlier Mesoamerican cultures like the Olmecs or the Maya. Regardless of their origins, what is clear is that the Aztecs took these early innovations and transformed them into something uniquely their own. Their ability to create and maintain these floating gardens is a testament to their ingenuity, their deep understanding of the natural world, and their drive to build a thriving civilization in an otherwise challenging environment. And let's not forget the sheer scale of it all. The Chinampas were not just small backyard gardens, they were massive agricultural landscapes. Some estimates suggest that there were as many as 13,000 acres of Chinampas surrounding Tenochtitlan, a staggering amount of land that would have been impossible to sustain without the careful management and ingenuity of the Aztec people. These gardens were as much a symbol of the Aztec Empire's might as the towering temples and grand marketplaces. They were proof that, with enough knowledge and determination, humans could shape their environment in ways that seemed almost magical. In a way, the Chinampas were the perfect reflection of the Aztec worldview, a delicate balance between human effort and the natural world. They didn't simply dominate the land, they worked with it, using their knowledge to create a system that was as sustainable as it was productive. This ability to adapt and thrive in a seemingly inhospitable environment is what made the Chinampas such a remarkable achievement in human history. Let's shift gears a bit and explore the fascinating role of the Tlaquilo, the specialized farmers responsible for tending to the Chinampas. These were no ordinary farmers. They were experts in their field, with an intricate knowledge of the land, the water, and the cycles of nature. In a sense, they were the heart and soul of the Chinampa system, ensuring that each floating garden was well maintained and productive. It was their job not just to plant and harvest, but to manage the delicate balance of the entire agricultural system. To understand the Tlaquilo, you need to first imagine the complexity of their work. Unlike modern farmers, who can rely on machines and technology, the Tlaquilo relied on years of traditional knowledge passed down through generations. They knew the best times to plant, when to flood or drain the Chinampas, and how to rotate crops to maintain soil fertility. But their expertise didn't end there. They were also skilled in understanding the behavior of the natural world, how the water levels in the lakes would change with the seasons, or how to predict rainfall based on the movement of the stars. Being a Tlaquilo was not just a profession, it was a way of life. It was a role that held great respect within Aztec society, as the success of the Chinampas was integral to the survival of Tenochtitlan. Without the Tlaquilo and their meticulous care, the floating gardens wouldn't have thrived, and the city would have faced food shortages. This specialized role was so important that the Tlaquilo were considered experts in their craft, often passing their knowledge down to younger generations. It's not hard to imagine these farmers working alongside their families, teaching their children the skills of irrigation and cultivation, just as you might pass down a family recipe. But the Tlaquilo's role didn't stop at farming. They also played an important part in the social and spiritual fabric of the Aztec community. Remember, the Aztecs viewed farming not just as a means of survival, but as a sacred duty. To the Aztecs, every act of cultivation was a form of reverence to the gods. The Tlaquilo would often make offerings to Tlaloc, the rain god, or Xochiquetzal, the goddess of flowers and fertility, in hopes of ensuring a bountiful harvest. In this sense, the Tlaquilo's work was a delicate dance between the physical and spiritual realms. It wasn't just about planting seeds, it was about honoring the gods and maintaining the balance of the world. Historians still debate the exact role that religion played in the life of the Tlaquilo. Some believe that the Aztecs' spiritual practices were central to the daily work of the farmers, with rituals and offerings taking place regularly to ensure the success of the harvest. Others argue that, while religion certainly influenced farming practices, the Tlacuilo were primarily focused on the practical aspects of agriculture. Regardless of where you fall on that debate, one thing is clear. The Tlacuilo were the backbone of the Chinampa system, and without their expertise, the entire agricultural system would have faltered. Beyond their farming skills, the Tlacuilo were also responsible for maintaining the canals that fed the Chinampas. Keeping the canals clear of debris and ensuring that the water flowed properly was crucial for the success of the Chinampas. In fact, there were even entire groups of people dedicated to the upkeep of the canal systems, ensuring that the water levels were stable and that the crops received the right amount of moisture. It's incredible to think that these canals, which we often think of as purely functional, were also part of a larger, intricate ecosystem, one that the Tlacuilo were intimately connected to. In a way, the work of the Tlacuilo was symbolic of the broader role of agriculture in Aztec society. The Aztecs saw farming as a way to connect with the divine, to honor the gods, and to ensure the survival of their civilization. The Tlacuilo were the stewards of this sacred duty, maintaining the land, the crops, and the relationship with the gods. Their work was as much spiritual as it was practical, a reflection of the Aztecs' deep connection to the natural world and their belief in the interconnectedness of all things. So, the next time you think about farmers, consider what it would have been like to be a Tlacuilo, a person who not only cultivated crops but also nurtured the very soul of the empire. The success of the Chinampas rested in their hands, and it's no exaggeration to say that the future of Tenochtitlan depended on their knowledge, skill, and devotion to the land. As we begin to pull back from the intricate workings of the Chinampas and the role of the Tlacuilo, let's take a moment to explore the eventual decline of this agricultural marvel. We often think of the Aztecs as an empire that lasted forever, their city of Tenochtitlan bustling with life, wealth, and ingenuity. But as with all great civilizations, even the mighty Aztec Empire faced its own set of challenges and, eventually, its downfall. The Chinampas, which had once been the lifeblood of the city, were not immune to the forces that led to the empire's fall. In the early years of Tenochtitlan's rise, the Chinampas flourished. They provided a stable, sustainable food source for a rapidly growing city. But by the time the Spanish arrived in the early 16th century, the empire was already under immense pressure. A combination of internal strife, external conflict, and perhaps most significantly the introduction of foreign diseases began to take its toll on the Aztec population. The arrival of the Spanish was a turning point. The conquest of the Aztecs, led by Hernán Cortés, was devastating for Tenochtitlan. The Spanish brought with them diseases such as smallpox, which decimated the native population. The introduction of new technologies, including firearms and cavalry, overwhelmed the Aztec military. And then there were the environmental factors: war, disruption of trade routes, and the destruction of the canal system and Chinampas as a direct result of the conflict. The once thriving Chinampas that had provided so much to the Aztec people began to fall into disrepair. One of the key challenges facing the Chinampas during this period was the disruption of the water supply. The canals and waterways that had once been carefully maintained were now neglected, as the Spanish imposed their own systems of governance and land use. As the water systems were altered, the Chinampas became less effective. The fertile soils of the islands, once so abundant in nutrients, began to erode, and the productivity of the gardens began to decline. It was as though the very lifeblood of the city, its water and its land, had been poisoned, and the Chinampas could no longer support the growing demands of the city. Historians still debate how much the destruction of the Chinampas contributed to the fall of the Aztec Empire. Some argue that the loss of these vital agricultural systems was a significant blow to the Aztecs' ability to feed their population and sustain their military efforts. Others believe that the empire's downfall was more complex, caused by a combination of factors including military defeat, political instability, and the influence of European diseases. Regardless of the exact cause, what is clear is that the destruction of the Chinampas played a role in the unraveling of the Aztec Empire. Interestingly, the Chinampas were not entirely lost in the aftermath of the conquest. while the Spanish altered the landscape of Tenochtitlan and eventually built Mexico City on top of it. Elements of the Chinampa system survived, albeit in a diminished form. In some areas around Mexico City, the Chinampas were revived in the centuries following the conquest. Even today, there are small pockets of Chinampa farming in the region, though the scale is nowhere near what it once was. Historians still argue over the extent to which the Chinampas were revived after the Spanish conquest. Some believe that the restoration of these floating gardens was a key part of the region's recovery, while others argue that the damage done to the agricultural system was irreversible. What is certain, however, is that the legacy of the Chinampas continues to live on in the agricultural traditions of the region. The system of growing food on floating islands, though much diminished, is a reminder of the extraordinary ingenuity of the Aztec people. In a way, the decline of the Chinampas is a tragic metaphor for the fall of the Aztec Empire itself. A system of innovation, hard work, and careful balance, once thriving and self-sustaining, was eventually destroyed by forces beyond its control. And yet, like the Chinampas, the legacy of the Aztecs and their agricultural achievements has not been entirely erased. Even as the physical gardens disappeared, the knowledge and techniques developed by the Aztecs lived on in the memory of their descendants, who continued to honor their ancestors' ingenuity through the practice of sustainable farming. Historians still debate whether the Aztecs could have sustained their empire if they had been able to maintain the Chinampas and their agricultural systems. Some argue that the destruction of the Chinampas was a fatal blow to the empire's survival, while others suggest that the empire was already in decline by the time the Spanish arrived. Regardless, the fall of the Chinampas is a testament to the fragility of even the most advanced civilizations, and a reminder that no matter how powerful a society may seem, it is never invincible. Having witnessed the decline of the Chinampas, let's now shift our focus to another remarkable aspect of the Aztec civilization: the sophisticated environmental engineering that allowed the Chinampas to thrive in the first place. In Tenochtitlan, water management wasn't just about keeping the crops watered. It was about maintaining the delicate balance of the entire ecosystem that supported the city and its agricultural systems. Without an understanding of the natural world and its rhythms, the Chinampas would have been impossible to sustain. So, how did the Aztecs manage to control water in a way that would make even modern engineers stop and stare? First and foremost, the Aztecs were experts in hydrology. They had a deep understanding of how water flowed and how it interacted with the land. Their approach to water management was multifaceted, encompassing everything from the construction of canals to the use of dams, dikes, and even artificial islands like the Chinampas themselves. Tenochtitlan, built on the marshy shores of Lake Texcoco, presented unique challenges in terms of water control. Yet, the Aztecs rose to these challenges with ingenuity that seems ahead of its time. One of the most impressive aspects of their water management system was the construction of Chinampa Islands themselves. The canals not only served as transportation routes and irrigation channels, they also acted as barriers, controlling the movement of water around the city. These waterways were meticulously designed to regulate the flow of water in and out of the Chinampas, ensuring that the gardens remained flooded in the rainy season but didn't drown in the dry season. The Aztecs understood the importance of seasonal flooding, which brought nutrients from the lake bed and replenished the soil. They created systems that allowed them to flood their gardens deliberately and regulate the levels to prevent oversaturation or drought. To make this work, the Aztecs constructed elaborate systems of dikes and levees, raising the land around the city and controlling the lake's water levels. The dikes were built to direct the flow of water away from the city during times of heavy rain, preventing flooding that could have destroyed crops and homes. During the dry season, the same dikes helped retain water in the Chinampas, ensuring the crops had enough moisture to survive. These dikes and levees were part of a larger, highly sophisticated system of water management that turned Tenochtitlan into a well-oiled machine. The canals, dikes, and Chinampas worked together, creating a harmonious system where water, land, and human ingenuity met in perfect balance. Historians still argue about the specifics of the engineering techniques the Aztecs used to construct these systems. Some believe the Aztecs built their canals and dikes with simple tools, while others suggest that they used more advanced methods, possibly even employing some form of rudimentary surveying or knowledge of water flow dynamics. What is clear is that their understanding of hydrology was both practical and visionary. They didn't just see water as a resource to be used, they understood its power and worked with it to create a thriving agricultural society. Even more impressive is the fact that the Aztecs did all of this without the benefit of modern technology. They didn't have bulldozers, cranes, or computers to model their water systems. Instead, they relied on simple tools like digging sticks, baskets, and canoes to carry out their projects. And yet, they managed to construct an intricate network of canals, dikes, and levees that allowed them to thrive in a city built on water. It's a testament to their ingenuity and their ability to think creatively about the resources they had at their disposal. In a way, the Aztecs' relationship with water was symbolic of their broader world view. They didn't see themselves as separate from nature, but rather as part of a larger system. The canals, the chinampas, the dikes, these were all extensions of the natural world, carefully shaped and guided by human hands, but still very much connected to the forces of nature. The Aztecs recognized the need to work with nature, not against it, and this understanding helped them create one of the most successful and sustainable agricultural systems in history. Historians still debate the true extent of the Aztecs' water engineering capabilities. Some suggest that their systems were purely practical, developed out of necessity to feed the people of Tenochtitlan. Others argue that the Aztecs' water management techniques were a reflection of their spiritual beliefs, with the flow of water serving as a metaphor for life and fertility. Either way, it's clear that the Aztecs' knowledge of water was a driving force behind their success as a civilization. And it's one of the reasons why the Chinampas and the surrounding canals were able to feed a growing empire for so long. Looking back, it's hard not to marvel at the Aztecs' achievements in environmental engineering. They built a city on a lake, transformed it into a flourishing metropolis, and created an agricultural system that provided food for hundreds of thousands of people. In doing so, they proved that with a deep understanding of the natural world, humans can build sustainable societies that thrive even in the most challenging of environments. Having explored the vast and intricate systems of water management, let's now zoom in on a more philosophical aspect of the Chinampas, the way the Aztecs perceived their relationship with nature. The floating gardens weren't just agricultural tools or a marvel of engineering. They were also deeply symbolic. In the Aztec worldview, nature wasn't a resource to be exploited, but a living, breathing entity to be respected and revered. The Chinampas, in their own way, encapsulated this belief. They weren't just islands of crops, they were expressions of harmony, balance, and divine intervention. The Aztecs believed that the natural world was governed by forces that were beyond human control. The gods controlled the seasons, the rains, the growth of crops, and the cycles of life and death. And so, every act of farming on the Chinampas was, in essence, an act of divine homage. The Tlaquilo and the farmers who worked the Chinampas weren't just tending crops. They were engaging in a spiritual practice that acknowledged their dependence on the gods and the land. Every seed planted, every harvest reaped, was a gift from the divine, a reminder that humans were merely stewards of the earth, not its masters. At the heart of the Aztec worldview was the concept of duality. The universe was seen as a place of constant tension between opposing forces, life and death, light and dark, creation and destruction. This duality was reflected in every aspect of their society, including their agricultural practices. The Chinampas, as a system of floating islands, perfectly captured this balance. They were, in a sense, both part of the natural world and a human-made creation. The islands existed because the Aztecs manipulated the natural environment, but they thrived because they worked in harmony with the forces of nature. They were a symbol of the Aztecs' belief that human activity should never be in opposition to nature, but rather should be integrated into it. Historians still debate the full extent of the spiritual significance of the Chinampas. Some argue that they were seen as symbolic representations of life's cyclical nature. Just as the Chinampas grew and flourished, they would eventually be consumed by the water and returned to the earth. This cycle of life and death mirrored the Aztec understanding of the universe. Others believe that the Chinampas were considered a sacred act of creation, a way for the Aztecs to reclaim land from the water and demonstrate their ability to shape the world around them. Whatever the precise interpretation, it's clear that the Chinampas were much more than just agricultural plots. They were a reflection of the Aztecs' deep spiritual connection to the earth. The floating gardens also played a central role in the Aztecs' religious ceremonies. Agriculture and religion were inseparable in Aztec culture, and many of their most important religious rituals were tied to the cycles of planting and harvesting. The Aztecs believed that the gods required offerings in exchange for the blessings of fertility and abundance. Many of these offerings came from the Chinampas. Crops like maize, beans, and squash were considered sacred and were often used in religious ceremonies. For example, the god Tlaloc, the deity of rain and fertility, was often honored with offerings of maize, which was a symbol of life itself. It's easy to imagine the Tlacuilo offering their freshly harvested crops to the gods, thanking them for the bounty they had provided and asking for continued blessings. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Chinampas is how they reflect the Aztecs' holistic approach to life. There was no separation between the sacred and the mundane in their worldview. The work of farming was as sacred as the work of building temples or performing religious ceremonies. In this way, the Chinampas were an integral part of the religious and cultural identity of the Aztec people. They weren't just a practical solution to feeding the population. They were a manifestation of the Aztecs' spiritual beliefs and their desire to live in harmony with the natural world. Historians still debate how much the Chinampas were seen as a religious tool versus an agricultural one. Some believe that they were primarily seen as a means to feed the population and support the economy, while others argue that their spiritual significance was just as important as their agricultural value. What is clear, however, is that the Chinampas were a physical manifestation of the Aztecs' belief in the interconnectedness of life, nature, and the divine. They were not just a way to produce food. They were a way for the Aztecs to live in balance with the forces of nature and honor the gods that govern those forces. Looking back at the Chinampas, it's hard not to marvel at the complexity of the Aztec worldview. They didn't just build gardens, they built entire ecosystems that were both practical and symbolic, embodying their spiritual beliefs and their relationship with the earth. The floating gardens were a testament to the Aztecs' understanding of the delicate balance between human activity and the natural world. In a sense, the Chinampas were more than just agricultural innovation. They were a reflection of the very heart of Aztec civilization. As we continue to explore the legacy of the Chinampas, let's take a moment to examine their profound impact on the Aztec economy. These floating gardens weren't just a marvel of agricultural engineering. They were also a cornerstone of the economic system that powered Tenochtitlan and the wider Aztec Empire. The city was one of the most densely populated and economically vibrant in the world at the time, and the Chinampas played a central role in sustaining that thriving metropolis. Without them, it's hard to imagine how Tenochtitlan could have fed its people, supported its military, or maintained its impressive wealth. The economy of the Aztec Empire was built on a complex system of tribute trade and local production. The Chinampas contributed to all of these systems in a way that made them indispensable. First, and perhaps most obviously, the floating gardens were a source of agricultural production that could not be matched by traditional farming methods. A single Chinampa was capable of producing multiple harvests each year, and the Aztecs were able to grow a variety of crops, from staple foods like maize, beans, and squash, to luxury goods like cacao and cotton. This productivity meant that the Chinampas were able to provide a steady supply of food, not only for the people of Tenochtitlan, but for the empire as a whole. In Tenochtitlan, the Chinampas were crucial to feeding a population that may have reached as high as 200,000 people. That's a lot of mouths to feed, and the productivity of the Chinampas was key to ensuring that the city could support its vast and growing population. The ability to produce food quickly and efficiently allowed Tenochtitlan to maintain its status as a bustling metropolis, and the Chinampas became integral to the functioning of the city's markets. Fresh produce from the Chinampas, everything from vegetables to flowers, was sold in the city's famed marketplaces, which were some of the largest and most sophisticated in the ancient world. But the Chinampas weren't just a local food source. They also played a major role in the empire's trade networks. Tenochtitlan was strategically located at the heart of a vast trade network that stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific coast. Goods from the Chinampas were exchanged in markets across the empire, where they were traded for luxury items, tools, and other goods. The wealth generated by these trade networks was one of the key factors in the Aztecs' rise to power. The Chinampas, by providing a steady and reliable source of food, helped fuel this trade system, ensuring that Tenochtitlan remained at the center of the empire's commercial activity. The role of the Chinampas in the Aztec economy wasn't limited to just food production and trade, though. The floating gardens also had cultural and symbolic value. In many ways, the Chinampas were a manifestation of the Aztecs' ability to transform their environment and build something greater than what nature had originally provided. By creating these floating islands, the Aztecs demonstrated their mastery over the land and their deep understanding of the forces of nature. The Chinampas were not only functional, they were also a symbol of the Aztecs' resilience, creativity, and ingenuity. Historians still debate how exactly the Chinampas contributed to the empire's wealth. Some argue that the floating gardens were primarily a tool for ensuring food security, while others believe they played a more significant role in the economic network of the empire. Regardless of the precise role they played, there's no doubt that the Chinampas were a critical component of the Aztec economy. They allowed Tenochtitlan to thrive in a way that few other ancient cities could match, and their legacy is still felt in modern-day Mexico, where the Chinampa farming tradition has been revived in some areas around Mexico City. So, what can we learn from the Chinampas today? In an era of industrial agriculture and environmental challenges, the Chinampas offer a glimpse into a different way of thinking about farming. The Aztecs didn't rely on chemical fertilizers, machinery, or large-scale irrigation systems. Instead, they worked with the natural environment to create a system that was both sustainable and highly productive. The Chinampas were, in many ways, an ancient example of sustainable agriculture that balanced human needs with the health of the environment. As we face challenges related to climate change, food security, and environmental degradation, the Chinampas offer a model for how we might rethink our approach to farming. The principles of crop rotation, water conservation, and ecological balance that the Aztecs used in their floating gardens could be adapted to modern agricultural practices, potentially offering solutions to some of the most pressing issues facing the world today. In that sense, the Chinampas are not just a fascinating relic of the past. They are a living legacy, one that continues to inspire and inform the way we think about food production and sustainability. As we continue to explore the Aztec civilization, it's important to take a step back and consider the larger significance of the Chinampas. While they were undoubtedly an engineering marvel and a source of economic prosperity, the floating gardens were also a powerful symbol of the Aztecs' relationship with the environment. For the Aztecs, nature wasn't something to be conquered. It was something to be understood, respected, and, ultimately, integrated into their way of life. The Chinampas embodied this philosophy in a very real way, reflecting a worldview that saw humans as an integral part of the natural world, rather than separate from it. The floating gardens weren't just about food production, they were also about sustaining life itself. In the Aztec worldview, the earth was a living organism, constantly shifting and changing, and it was the duty of humans to maintain harmony within it. The Chinampas, as human-made islands built on water, were a perfect example of this harmony. They existed in a delicate balance between human ingenuity and the natural environment, with each island of crops contributing to the larger ecological system of Tenochtitlan. But the Chinampas were also a reminder of the impermanence of life. The gardens were constantly changing, just as the natural world itself was in a state of constant flux. Crops grew, flourished, and were harvested, only to be replaced by new crops in an endless cycle of life and death. The Aztecs understood this cyclical nature of existence, and the Chinampas reflected that understanding. In a way, the floating gardens were a microcosm of the Aztec view of the world, constantly evolving, constantly in motion, and always dependent on the balance between the forces of nature and human activity. One of the most striking aspects of the Chinampas was how they were able to adapt to the changing needs of the city. As Tenochtitlan grew and the population expanded, the demand for food increased. The Chinampas responded to this demand, expanding in number and size to accommodate the city's needs. It was a system that was not only sustainable but also dynamic, able to adjust to the ever-changing demands of a growing civilization. This adaptability was key to the success of the Chinampas, but it was also a reflection of the Aztecs' larger philosophy of balance and fluidity. In many ways, the floating gardens were a manifestation of the Aztecs' ability to adjust to the changing rhythms of nature. They understood that nothing in life was static, that everything was in a constant state of flux, and they built their agricultural system accordingly. The Chinampas, like the Aztecs themselves, were able to thrive in a world that was constantly shifting and changing. This perspective on life and nature also influenced the Aztecs' religious beliefs. The gods in the Aztec worldview were deeply intertwined with the forces of nature, and maintaining harmony with these forces was essential to the survival of the civilization. The Chinampas, as a reflection of this harmony, were seen not just as a means of feeding the people but as a sacred act, a way to honor the gods and to maintain balance in the world. The Aztecs believed that the fertility of the earth, and by extension the success of their crops, was a direct result of the gods' favor. Every crop harvested from the Chinampas was seen as a gift from the divine, a symbol of the gods' continued blessings. Historians still debate the exact religious significance of the Chinampas. Some suggest that they were primarily viewed as a practical tool for feeding the population, with any religious connotations being secondary. Others argue that the spiritual importance of the Chinampas was central to their existence, with every step of the agricultural process being seen as an act of reverence. Whatever the case may have been, it's clear that the Chinampas were not just a means of survival. They were a living expression of the Aztecs' deep spiritual connection to the land and to the gods. This spiritual connection extended to the people who worked on the Chinampas. The Tequilo, the farmers who tended to the floating gardens, were not just laborers. They were stewards of the land, guardians of the delicate balance between humans and nature. Their work was seen as sacred, and their role in the community was of great importance. In many ways, they were seen as the keepers of life itself, ensuring that the crops would flourish and that the city would remain nourished. The Tlaquilo's work was not just about sustenance, it was about maintaining the very fabric of the Aztec way of life. The importance of the Chinampas in the Aztec worldview was profound. They were more than just an agricultural system. They were a symbol of the interconnectedness of life, death, and rebirth. They were a reflection of the Aztecs' belief in the cyclical nature of existence, where everything is born, grows, dies, and is reborn again. The floating gardens, like the people who tended them, were constantly evolving, constantly changing, and always in tune with the rhythms of the natural world. So, as we reflect on the legacy of the Chinampas, it's important to remember that they were not just a technological achievement or an agricultural innovation. They were a symbol of the Aztecs' deep understanding of the world and their place within it. The floating gardens were a testament to the Aztecs' ability to live in harmony with nature, to adapt to change, and to find balance in a constantly shifting world. As we delve deeper into the enduring influence of the Chinampas, it's impossible to ignore how these floating gardens shaped the Aztecs' agricultural innovations, and how their legacy continues to influence modern-day practices. While the Chinampas were fundamentally tied to the Aztec Empire, their impact stretches far beyond the fall of Tenochtitlan, offering valuable lessons for contemporary agriculture. The efficiency of Chinampa farming has been celebrated for centuries, especially when looking at its ability to feed a growing population while minimizing waste. Each Chinampa wasn't just a patch of fertile land. It was a micro-ecosystem in its own right, designed to use the surrounding resources efficiently. This self-sustaining model of farming meant that crops could be grown without the need for artificial fertilizers or extensive irrigation systems. The water from the lake served as both irrigation and a natural fertilizer, while the cycle of flooding and draining ensured that the soil remained rich in nutrients. One of the reasons the Chinampas were so successful was their adaptability. As we've already discussed, they were able to provide continuous harvests, adapting to the seasons and fluctuating water levels in Lake Texcoco. This sustainability was a crucial factor in the Aztecs' ability to thrive as a city built on water. In fact, the Chinampas' success in providing consistent yields of a wide variety of crops was a key part of Tenochtitlan's ability to support its enormous population, which may have reached up to 200,000 residents. This allowed the Aztecs not only to feed their people but also to engage in extensive trade. which brought in goods from distant regions and made their city one of the wealthiest and most influential in Mesoamerica. Today, modern farmers have much to learn from the Chinampas. With growing concerns about climate change, soil degradation, and water scarcity, the lessons of the Chinampas are more relevant than ever. In places around the world, especially in regions like Mexico, there are efforts to revive the Chinampa farming method as part of sustainable agricultural practices. Some researchers and farmers believe that Chinampas could provide a solution to modern food production challenges, particularly in urban areas where space for traditional farming is limited. The combination of ecological balance, water conservation, and the use of natural fertilizers makes Chinampa farming a perfect candidate for the future of agriculture in the face of growing environmental concerns. It's not just about replicating the system, though. The Chinampas were born out of the unique environmental conditions of the region, and they were crafted with a deep understanding of the land and water around Tenochtitlan. This type of localized, environmentally conscious farming is something that modern agriculture often struggles to achieve. While large-scale industrial farming uses chemicals, fertilizers, and heavy machinery to produce food on a massive scale, the Chinampas were all about working with nature. This sustainable model prioritized minimal disruption to the land, a key principle that is increasingly valued as we consider how to feed a growing global population without further damaging the environment. Furthermore, the Chinampas represent a model of decentralized farming. Each individual farm or family worked within its own small plot of floating land, but they were connected through a shared system of canals and water management. This kind of small-scale farming is often seen as more sustainable and resilient than industrial-scale farming, especially when it comes to maintaining biodiversity and reducing the need for external inputs like pesticides and herbicides. This community-driven approach to farming can be a valuable strategy for modern society, especially in the context of local food systems and reducing the carbon footprint associated with global food supply chains. Another key lesson the Chinampas offer is the power of innovation in the face of adversity. The Aztecs faced considerable challenges in their environment, living on an island in the middle of a lake, with limited land space for growing crops, but they turned these challenges into opportunities. By creating the Chinampas, they were able to transform their environment into one that could sustain a large and complex society. This resilience and creativity in the face of adversity is a lesson that modern farmers and urban planners can take to heart as we address the challenges of our time. Historians still debate how many elements of the Chinampa system have survived into modern times. Some argue that the floating gardens were mostly abandoned after the Spanish conquest, while others point to the continued use of Chinampa techniques in certain regions around Mexico City. What is undeniable, however, is that the knowledge of Chinampa farming has not been lost entirely, and efforts to revive it have grown in recent years. These efforts are a testament to the enduring legacy of the Aztecs and their ability to innovate in ways that can still inspire sustainable practices today. As we look to the future, it's worth asking ourselves, can we learn from the Aztecs and their Chinampas? Can we find ways to adapt their ancient wisdom to solve modern problems? The answers to these questions will help shape the future of agriculture, sustainability, and our relationship with the environment. The Chinampas weren't just a temporary solution to an agricultural challenge. They were a long-term, sustainable way of thinking about farming, one that integrated people with nature in a way that is increasingly needed in the world today. So, as we consider the fate of the Chinampas and their lessons for modern society, we're reminded of the fact that true innovation doesn't always come from the latest technology or the newest trend. It can come from the ancient wisdom and practices that have stood the test of time. The Chinampas were an ingenious solution to the challenges of their time, and they may yet offer us solutions for the challenges of our own. As we reach the halfway point in our journey through the story of the Chinampas, it's time to slow the pace and reflect on the enduring legacy of these remarkable floating gardens. We've explored their engineering, their agricultural prowess, and their cultural significance. Now let's take a moment to appreciate how the Chinampas symbolize the values and philosophies that shaped the Aztec Empire, and how they continue to resonate today. The Chinampas were, above all, a testament to the Aztec belief in the interconnectedness of life. For the Aztecs, everything had a purpose, and every part of the natural world was part of a greater whole. The Chinampas weren't just islands of crops floating on a lake. They were microcosms of the world itself, carefully balanced and maintained by the people who worked them. Just as the Aztecs saw themselves as stewards of the earth, the Chinampas were a physical manifestation of that stewardship. They weren't just a means of survival. They were a way of living in harmony with nature, a way of sustaining life and ensuring that the cycles of nature were respected. The symbolism of the Chinampas went beyond just their role in agriculture. They were also a reflection of the Aztec worldview, which placed a strong emphasis on balance, cyclical time, and the ever-present interplay of life and death. The floating gardens were a perfect example of this balance. The crops that grew on the Chinampas were not permanent. They were harvested, replanted, and replaced, just as life itself is a continuous cycle of birth, growth, decay, and renewal. This constant cycle of life and death was reflected in the way the Chinampas were maintained, with the soil being replenished and the water levels carefully managed to ensure that the gardens remained fertile. In this sense, the Chinampas were a living symbol of the Aztecs' understanding of the natural world, a world where everything was in constant flux, but everything had a role to play. For the Aztecs, the Chinampas were more than just a way to feed their people. They were a reflection of their spiritual beliefs, their respect for the natural world, and their understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. The act of cultivating the Chinampas was an act of reverence to the gods, a way of honoring the forces of nature that sustained life. Every seed planted, every crop harvested, was seen as a gift from the divine, a reminder of the sacred bond between humans and the earth. The floating gardens, in a way, were a microcosm of the Aztec view of the world, a world where humans were not separate from nature, but were a part of the larger web of life that connected everything. Historians still debate the extent to which the Aztecs saw the Chinampas as a religious endeavor. Some argue that they were primarily a practical tool for feeding the population, while others believe that the spiritual significance of the Chinampas was just as important as their agricultural value. Regardless of the precise interpretation, it's clear that the Chinampas were a reflection of the Aztecs' deep spiritual connection to the land, their gods, and the cycles of nature. They were a way of living in harmony with the world around them, ensuring that the balance between humans and nature was maintained for generations to come. Even today, the lessons of the Chinampas continue to resonate. In a world where modern agriculture often prioritizes efficiency and profit over sustainability and ecological balance, the Chinampas remind us that it's possible to create systems of food production that work in harmony with nature. The principles of sustainable agriculture that the Aztecs employed in their floating gardens, such as crop rotation, water conservation, and ecological balance, are as relevant today as they were 500 years ago. As we face the challenges of climate change, soil degradation, and water scarcity, the Chinampas offer a model of resilience and adaptability, one that emphasizes the importance of working with nature rather than against it. In many ways, the Chinampas offer us a glimpse into a future where food production is both sustainable and abundant. By using local resources efficiently, conserving water, and working in harmony with the natural environment, we can create agricultural systems that nourish both people and the planet. The revival of Chinampa farming in some parts of Mexico is a testament to the enduring legacy of the Aztecs and the potential for these ancient techniques to inform modern agricultural practices. But beyond the technical aspects of the Chinampas, there's something deeper to consider. The floating gardens were a symbol of the Aztecs' understanding of the world, one that saw life as a delicate balance between human activity and the forces of nature. In a world that often seems disconnected from the natural world, the Chinampas remind us of the importance of finding that balance, of respecting the earth and working with it to ensure a sustainable future for generations to come. As we reflect on the legacy of the Chinampas, it's clear that they were more than just an agricultural innovation. They were a way of life, a reflection of the values and beliefs that shaped the Aztec civilization. The floating gardens were a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of the Aztec people, and they continue to inspire us today, offering valuable lessons in sustainability, resilience, and the importance of living in harmony with the world around us. As we move further into the exploration of the Chinampas and the lessons they offer, it's important to address the role these floating gardens played not only in agriculture, but in the overall urbanization of Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan, built on the marshy lands of Lake Texcoco, was an extraordinary city, one that existed in a precarious environment. Despite the challenges posed by living on a lake, the Aztecs transformed this seemingly inhospitable location into a thriving metropolis. The key to the success of the city was the combination of urban planning, engineering, and agriculture, all of which were exemplified by the Chinampas. The Chinampas weren't just agricultural islands, they were integral to the design of the city itself. Tenochtitlan's urban landscape was dominated by a series of canals that connected the different neighborhoods, markets, and temples. These canals were the primary routes of transportation, but they also played a vital role in the agricultural system. The Chinampas were built in the shallow waters of the lake, creating an intricate system of floating islands that served as the backbone of the city's food production. This allowed for a highly efficient method of farming in an area that otherwise wouldn't have been suitable for traditional agriculture. The urban design of Tenochtitlan was centered around the canals, and the Chinampas were strategically located to maximize the use of space and water. The canals allowed for easy transport of goods to and from the Chinampas, ensuring that fresh produce could be quickly delivered to the bustling marketplaces. As a result, the city was able to support a large population with a steady supply of food. The floating gardens were a crucial part of the system that made this urbanization possible. The Aztecs were able to turn the lake into a thriving cityscape, where the needs of the people were met through both ingenuity and respect for the environment. The Chinampas were also a reflection of the Aztecs' broader urban philosophy. The city of Tenochtitlan was designed with careful consideration for the natural world. The layout of the canals and Chinampas was not only functional but also symbolic. The canals, which radiated outward from the center of the city, represented the flow of life, connecting the city to the surrounding natural world. The floating gardens themselves symbolized the Aztecs' ability to create life out of seemingly impossible circumstances. In a way, the Chinampas were both a practical solution to the challenges of farming on a lake and a reflection of the Aztec belief that humans could work in harmony with nature to create a flourishing society. Historians continue to marvel at the ingenuity of the Aztec urban planning system. The city of Tenochtitlan was a marvel of engineering, with floating islands, canals, causeways, and temples all working together to form a cohesive and functional city. The Chinampas were at the heart of this system, providing food, contributing to the economy, and even playing a role in the cultural and religious life of the city. They were a central feature of the Aztec urban experience, illustrating the deep connection between the people and the land they lived on. What makes the Chinampas even more remarkable is how they contributed to the sustainability of the city. In contrast to many modern cities, which rely on imported goods and complex supply chains, Tenochtitlan was largely self-sufficient. The Chinampas allowed the city to produce its own food, reducing its reliance on external resources. This level of self-sufficiency was critical in sustaining the city over time, especially in the face of the growing population and the pressures of imperial expansion. The Chinampas were not just a food source, they were part of a larger, self-sustaining ecosystem that allowed Tenochtitlan to thrive. Today, the lessons from Tenochtitlan and the Chinampas are particularly relevant as we look at the challenges faced by modern cities. Urbanization is on the rise, and many cities around the world are struggling with issues like food insecurity, climate change, and unsustainable urban development. The Chinampas offer a model of urban sustainability that integrates food production, water management, and ecological balance. In places where space for agriculture is limited, the Chinampa system could provide a valuable solution, allowing urban areas to produce their own food while conserving water and preserving natural resources. The revival of Chinampa farming in parts of Mexico City serves as a reminder that even in the most urbanized environments, there is potential for sustainable, local food production. These efforts demonstrate how ancient agricultural practices can be adapted to modern needs, blending the wisdom of the past with the challenges of the present. The floating gardens of Tenochtitlan offer hope for a future where cities are not just centers of commerce and industry, but also hubs of sustainable living. Historians still debate the exact extent to which the Chinampas influenced the development of the city's infrastructure. Some believe that the efficiency of the Chinampas and the canal system was key to Tenochtitlan's ability to grow and prosper. while others argue that the empire's military prowess and political organization played a larger role. Regardless of where you stand in that debate, one thing is clear. The Chinampas were a crucial component of the empire's success, both in terms of food production and urban development. In the end, the Chinampas were more than just an agricultural innovation. They were an embodiment of the Aztec worldview. They reflected the Aztecs' belief in the interconnectedness of life, their ability to adapt to their environment, and their respect for the natural world. They were a testament to the Aztecs' ingenuity and their vision of a world where humans, nature, and technology worked together in harmony. As we continue our exploration of the Chinampas and their influence, it's important to consider the role these floating gardens played in the Aztecs' food security and how they shaped their agricultural practices. The Chinampas were not just a source of food. They were the backbone of a system designed to support a rapidly growing population in one of the most unique and challenging environments in the world. The success of Tenochtitlan was deeply intertwined with its ability to feed its people, and the Chinampas played a key role in ensuring that this would be possible even in the face of challenges. The unique advantage of the Chinampas was their ability to provide multiple harvests per year. In most agricultural systems, a single crop could only be harvested once per season. But the floating gardens allowed the Aztecs to grow crops that could thrive in the nutrient-rich mud of Lake Texcoco. Because the Chinampas were constantly flooded and refilled with fresh nutrients from the water, the soil remained fertile throughout the year. This meant that the Aztecs could harvest crops at different times, depending on the needs of the community, resulting in a much more consistent food supply. This was a critical factor in feeding the city's large population. Moreover, the diversity of crops grown on the Chinampas contributed to the overall resilience of the agricultural system. While maize, beans, and squash were the primary staples, the floating gardens also produced a variety of fruits and vegetables, including chili peppers, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, and even cacao, the key ingredient in chocolate. The range of crops allowed the Aztecs to diversify their diet, reducing the risk of famine due to the failure of a single crop. The Chinampas were a flexible and diverse agricultural system, capable of providing not only for the everyday needs of the population, but also for the luxury goods demanded by the elite. The ability to produce large quantities of food was also essential for supporting the military. The Aztec Empire, at its height, was constantly expanding, and the Chinampas played a vital role in sustaining the troops who went off to battle. Providing for a large army in the field required a reliable supply of food, and the floating gardens were an efficient way to produce enough sustenance for the empire's warriors. Even during times of war, the Chinampas helped keep the population fed, ensuring that Tenochtitlan remained strong and resilient in the face of external threats. Yet, the importance of the Chinampas went beyond just food production. It also shaped the social and political structure of the Aztec society. The Chinampas were a symbol of the connection between the people and the land, with farmers and laborers playing a critical role in maintaining the system. The work required to build and maintain the Chinampas was intensive, and it was the responsibility of the Tlaquilo, the expert farmers, to ensure that the floating gardens continued to thrive. The labor of the Tlaquilo was revered because it directly impacted the prosperity of the city. The care and expertise involved in tending to the Chinampas demonstrated the deep respect the Aztecs had for their land and the gods who provided for them. The social structure of the Aztecs was also reflected in the way the Chinampas were organized. Farmers were often grouped into communities that worked together to manage the floating gardens, fostering a sense of collective responsibility. The labor was not just for the benefit of individuals, it was for the benefit of the entire community. This communal approach to farming was not only practical but also a reflection of the Aztec values of cooperation, shared responsibility, and interconnectedness. Each Chinampa was part of a larger network that supported the city, from the markets where produce was sold to the temples where offerings were made to the gods. Historians still debate how much of the Chinampa system was rooted in earlier agricultural traditions. While the Aztecs are often credited with perfecting the floating garden technique, there is evidence to suggest that earlier Mesoamerican cultures, like the Olmecs and Maya, may have influenced the development of Chinampa farming. Some scholars argue that the concept of farming on waterlogged land may have originated with these earlier societies, with the Aztecs refining the methods to create a more sustainable and productive system. Others believe that the Chinampas were entirely an Aztec innovation, Regardless of their origins, the fact remains that the Aztecs turned the floating gardens into a central component of their food security and urban planning. What makes the Chinampas even more remarkable is their ability to survive the test of time. Despite the destruction of the Aztec Empire and the colonial forces that followed, the legacy of the Chinampas lives on. In modern-day Mexico, there are still efforts to revive and preserve the traditional practice of Chinampa farming. In areas around Mexico City, especially in Chocomilco, the floating gardens continue to be used for both agriculture and tourism, attracting visitors who want to experience a piece of Aztec history. These efforts to preserve the Chinampas highlight the enduring value of this ancient agricultural system, which remains a symbol of resilience, sustainability, and the deep connection between humans and the land. As we consider the future of food production and sustainability, the Chinampas offer important lessons. They show that it's possible to create a system of agriculture that works in harmony with the environment, using local resources efficiently and sustainably. In a world facing the challenges of climate change, soil degradation, and water scarcity, the Chinampas offer a model for how we might rethink the way we produce food. By learning from the past and adapting ancient wisdom to modern needs, we can work towards a future where food production is both abundant and sustainable. As we continue to reflect on the Chinampas, it's essential to consider their role in the broader context of Aztec society. The floating gardens were not just a technological or agricultural marvel. They were deeply embedded in the cultural, religious, and social fabric of the Aztec people. Beyond their obvious practical benefits, the Chinampas were a living embodiment of the Aztec worldview, a worldview that saw humans as stewards of the earth, tasked with maintaining a balance between nature and society. The Chinampas, therefore, were not only a means of survival, but also a symbol of the Aztecs' deeply rooted spiritual beliefs and their understanding of the cosmos. In Aztec culture, everything had its place within the natural order. This worldview was reflected in their agriculture. The act of farming was seen as sacred, an essential part of maintaining harmony with the gods. Every step of the process, from planting seeds to harvesting crops, was infused with ritual and reverence. The Chinampas were seen as an extension of this belief. They were not just islands of crops. They were islands of life, carefully nurtured by the Aztecs in a way that honored both the earth and the divine forces that governed it. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Chinampas is how they were incorporated into Aztec religious practices. Agriculture and religion were inseparable in Aztec society, and the Chinampas played a central role in religious ceremonies and rituals. Maize, the staple crop of the Aztecs, was considered sacred and was often offered to the gods as a symbol of fertility and life. The Chinampas, as the source of this maize and other crops, were seen as a direct connection to the divine. The very act of cultivating the floating gardens was, therefore, not just about providing food. It was about participating in the cosmic cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The Aztecs' relationship with nature was deeply spiritual. Their agricultural practices, including the use of the Chinampas, were part of a larger religious framework that understood nature as a living, breathing entity. The water that nourished the Chinampas was considered sacred, and the canals that carried it were seen as channels of life. The Aztecs believed that the gods, particularly Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility, had control over the water and the fertility of the land. Therefore, the act of farming on the Chinampas was a way of honoring these gods and ensuring that the natural world remained in balance. This spiritual connection was reflected in the rituals that accompanied agricultural work. Offerings to the gods, often in the form of food from the Chinampas, were made to ensure a bountiful harvest. The farmers, or tlacuilo, who worked the Chinampas, were not only skilled in the physical aspects of farming, they were also seen as spiritual practitioners, maintaining a sacred relationship with the land. For them, the harvest wasn't just a material accomplishment. It was a spiritual act that brought them closer to the divine. Historians still debate the exact nature of the religious rituals associated with Chinampa farming. Some believe that these rituals were deeply ingrained in the daily work of the farmers, while others argue that they were more symbolic, tied to specific ceremonial events rather than daily agricultural practices. Regardless of the specifics, it's clear that the Chinampas were far more than just an agricultural tool. They were a sacred space, a living manifestation of the Aztecs' belief in the interconnectedness of all things, nature, humanity, and the divine. The Chinampas also served as a physical representation of the Aztec concept of duality. In Aztec cosmology, everything was governed by opposing forces, life and death, light and dark, order and chaos, and the Chinampas embodied this balance. On the one hand, they were man-made creations, built from the earth and water. On the other hand, they were nurtured by the natural forces of the lake, the sun, and the rain. The floating gardens were both a product of human ingenuity and a testament to the Aztecs' understanding of the natural world. They were an expression of the Aztec belief that humanity was not separate from nature, but a part of it, working in harmony to sustain the delicate balance of life. As we look at the broader cultural implications of the Chinampas, we see that they were also an important social symbol. The Chinampas were not just a source of food, they were a reflection of the social and political structure of Aztec society. The creation and maintenance of the Chinampas required a large amount of labor, and this labor was often organized in a communal way. Farmers worked together to build and maintain the floating gardens, sharing knowledge and resources to ensure that the system remained productive. This sense of cooperation and mutual responsibility was central to Aztec society, where the well-being of the community was seen as more important than individual success. In a sense, the Chinampas were a symbol of the collective effort required to maintain the empire's success. The floating gardens were a product of the collaboration between the Tlaculo and the broader society, and they represented the interconnectedness of all people within the Aztec world. They were a reminder that every member of the society, from the farmers to the rulers, had a role to play in ensuring the survival and prosperity of the empire. Today, the Chinampas are not just a reminder of the Aztec Empire. They are a symbol of the enduring connection between humans and the environment. The practice of Chinampa farming continues in some parts of Mexico, and efforts to preserve and revive the technique offer hope for the future of sustainable agriculture. The legacy of the Chinampas is a testament to the ingenuity, spirituality, and resilience of the Aztec people, and it offers valuable lessons for our own relationship with the land and the natural world. As we continue to explore the enduring legacy of the Chinampas, it's crucial to consider the role they played in the Aztec social and economic life. The floating gardens were not just a marvel of agricultural engineering. They were also central to the day-to-day workings of Aztec society. The way the Chinampas influenced the distribution of food, the organization of labor, and the functioning of markets reveals much about the broader dynamics of the Aztec Empire and how they were able to sustain such a large and thriving civilization. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Chinampas was how they helped create a self-sustaining system. Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire, was built on an island in Lake Texcoco, which meant that the inhabitants had to rely on the surrounding environment for their survival. The Chinampas were the perfect solution, transforming the marshy lake bed into fertile, productive land. This allowed the Aztecs to produce a vast amount of food in a limited space, ensuring that the city could sustain a growing population. The floating gardens made it possible for the Aztecs to feed not just the urban population, but also the military, the elite, and the priests who required constant provisions. The Chinampas also played a crucial role in the empire's trade network. Tenochtitlan was a hub of commerce, and its markets were among the most sophisticated in the ancient world. Goods from all corners of the empire flowed into the city, and food from the Chinampas was a key commodity. Fresh produce such as maize, beans, tomatoes, and squash was traded alongside luxury items like cacao, cotton, and precious metals. The Chinampas allowed the Aztecs to keep their market stocked with a wide variety of goods, ensuring that they could meet the demands of both the local population and traders from other regions. Historians still debate the exact role that the Chinampas played in the trade economy. Some argue that the floating gardens were a primary source of the city's food supply, while others suggest that they were part of a larger agricultural system that included other forms of farming and trade. Regardless of the specifics, it's clear that the Chinampas were essential to Tenochtitlan's economic success. Without them, the city would have struggled to support its large population and maintain its position as a powerful center of commerce and culture. But the Chinampas didn't just provide food and trade goods, they were also a source of social cohesion. The work involved in creating and maintaining the chinampas was often done on a communal basis, with families and neighbors working together to manage the floating gardens. This shared labor fostered a sense of community and mutual responsibility. The Aztecs saw themselves as part of a larger social and ecological system, and the chinampas were a symbol of that interconnectedness. The work of farming was not just for individual gain, it was for the benefit of the entire society. In this way, the chinampas played an important role in reinforcing the Aztec social structure. The farmers or tlaquilo who worked the chinampas were respected for their skill and knowledge. They were seen as essential to the well-being of the entire community, and their labor was vital to the success of the empire. But the work wasn't limited to the farmers themselves. The creation of the chinampas required collaboration across different social groups, from the artisans who crafted the tools to the traders who transported the goods to the markets. This sense of shared responsibility helped to create a society that was tightly knit and resilient, one where every member had a role to play in sustaining the whole. The role of the chinampas in the social fabric of the Aztec Empire can also be seen in the way the gardens were integrated into the spiritual life of the people. The Aztecs viewed farming as a sacred act, and the care taken in tending to the chinampas reflected this reverence. The process of planting, growing, and harvesting crops on the chinampas was a way of honoring the gods and maintaining the balance between humanity and nature. The floating gardens, as living symbols of this harmony, were deeply embedded in the cultural and religious practices of the Aztec people. The interconnectedness of the chinampas with the spiritual beliefs of the Aztecs is one of the reasons why the floating gardens were such a powerful symbol. They represented more than just a method of food production. They embodied the Aztecs' view of the world as a system of interconnected forces, where every element of nature had a role to play. The chinampas were a reflection of this belief, and they were treated with the same reverence as the temples and other sacred sites in the city. As we look at the modern world, the lessons of the chinampas can still be applied. In a time when food security, climate change, and sustainability are pressing global issues, the chinampas offer a model for creating self-sustaining agricultural systems that can work in harmony with nature. The principles of ecological balance, resource conservation, and communal effort that the Aztecs used in their floating gardens are more relevant today than ever. By revisiting and adapting the methods of the chinampas, we have the opportunity to create more resilient food systems that can help address the challenges of the 21st century. As we continue to reflect on the profound lessons offered by the chinampas, it's important to turn our attention to their environmental and ecological significance. While the chinampas were a marvel of human ingenuity, they were also a testament to the Aztecs' deep understanding of the natural world. The floating gardens were more than just an agricultural system. They were a sustainable way of farming that worked in harmony with the ecosystem. The Aztecs, living in a world where resources were finite and the environment was constantly shifting, built an agricultural system that respected and worked with nature rather than against it. The very concept of chinampas was an example of environmental engineering, turning the lake bed into fertile ground through a series of natural processes. The Aztecs didn't simply clear land for farming. They worked with the land and water, shaping it to their needs while ensuring it remained productive and sustainable over time. The floating gardens were built by piling up mud and plant material, and these materials were constantly replenished through the annual flooding of the lake. The nutrients brought in by the rising water kept the soil fertile, reducing the need for external fertilizers and allowing crops to grow year-round. This natural cycle of renewal was one of the reasons the chinampas were so successful. It was a system that, while labor-intensive, did not degrade the environment. One of the key ecological benefits of the chinampas was their ability to maintain soil health. Unlike traditional farming methods that deplete the soil over time, the chinampas benefited from a continuous process of renewal. Each flooding cycle brought new nutrients to the soil, and the careful management of water levels ensured that the crops were never oversaturated. This system allowed the Aztecs to maintain high levels of productivity without sacrificing the health of the land. The chinampas were a shining example of how farming can work in harmony with the natural environment, rather than in opposition to it. The ecological balance of the chinampas wasn't just about soil health. It also included water management. The canals that surrounded the floating gardens were crucial for maintaining the delicate balance of the system. The canals served multiple functions. They provided irrigation for the crops, allowed for transportation, and helped control the flow of water in and out of the chinampas. By carefully managing the water levels, the Aztecs ensured that the crops received the right amount of moisture without being overwhelmed. This careful control of water was one of the reasons the chinampas could thrive in the face of seasonal floods and droughts. The canals and chinampas also had an important ecological role beyond farming. They created a rich habitat for wildlife, including fish, amphibians, and birds. The Aztecs recognized the importance of biodiversity, and the chinampas were designed to support a wide range of species. This was not just a byproduct of the system, it was an intentional part of the design. The Aztecs understood that the health of their crops was intertwined with the health of the ecosystem as a whole. The water in the canals provided a habitat for fish, which in turn helped with pest control by eating insects that might otherwise harm the crops. Similarly, the plants that grew on the chinampas provided a habitat for various species of birds, which helped with pollination. In many ways, the chinampas represent a form of agroecology that is more relevant than ever in a world where modern agriculture has often led to the degradation of ecosystems. The chinampas offer a blueprint for sustainable farming practices that work with nature. Today, as we face environmental challenges like soil erosion, water scarcity, and loss of biodiversity, the lessons of the chinampas can help guide us toward more sustainable agricultural systems. Efforts to revive chinampa farming in parts of Mexico demonstrate how this ancient practice can still have value in the modern world. In Xochimilco, for example, there are ongoing projects to restore and maintain the chinampas, using traditional methods to grow crops in a way that is both ecologically sustainable and economically viable. These efforts show that the chinampas are not just a relic of the past, but a living tradition that has the potential to inform the future of farming. The revival of the chinampas also highlights the importance of local food systems. In a world increasingly dependent on global trade and industrial agriculture, the chinampas offer a reminder of the value of locally grown food. By producing food within the city, the Aztecs reduced their reliance on external resources and built a more resilient food system. The modern world, too, faces increasing vulnerabilities due to global supply chain disruptions, climate change, and the centralization of food production. Revitalizing systems like the chinampas can help ensure that communities are better equipped to handle these challenges, making local food production a cornerstone of sustainability. In a time when environmental degradation and climate change are at the forefront of global concerns, the chinampas offer an example of how ancient agricultural practices can help us meet the challenges of the future. By learning from the Aztecs and adapting their techniques to modern conditions, we have the opportunity to build agricultural systems that are not only more sustainable, but also more resilient in the face of the environmental crises that lie ahead. The chinampas were not just a way to feed the people of Tenochtitlan. They were a model for living in harmony with the earth, a system that nurtured both the land and its people. Today, as we look to the future, the lessons of the chinampas remain as relevant as ever, offering hope for a more sustainable and harmonious world. As we move toward the conclusion of our deep dive into the chinampas and their enduring impact, it's crucial to examine how this ancient agricultural practice reflected the Aztecs' profound understanding of the interconnectedness of life, nature, and society. The floating gardens weren't just an agricultural feat, they were a manifestation of the Aztec philosophy that everything in the world is linked, and that human survival depends on maintaining a balance between nature and civilization. The chinampas were a perfect example of this, a living reminder of how the Aztecs saw the world not as something to dominate, but something to work with. The concept of balance was central to the Aztec worldview. They believed that the cosmos was full of opposing forces, life and death, creation and destruction, fertility and decay, and that it was crucial to maintain harmony between these forces. The chinampas, as both a practical and symbolic creation, embodied this duality. They were artificial islands, built by human hands, yet they relied entirely on the natural forces of water, mud, and plants to thrive. The work of the Tlaquilo, or Chinampa farmers, was therefore not just an act of agriculture, but an ongoing effort to maintain this balance between the human and natural worlds. Every aspect of the Chinampa system, reflected the Aztecs' understanding of the cyclical nature of life. The seasonal flooding of the lake, which replenished the soil, symbolized the continuous cycle of life and death. Just as the waters of the lake rose and fell, so did the crops planted on the Chinampas go through cycles of growth, decay, and renewal. This constant ebb and flow of life mirrored the Aztecs' belief in the eternal cycles of nature, themselves a reflection of the broader cosmological order. By tending to the Chinampas, the Tlaquilo were participating in this cosmic cycle, nurturing the land and its crops as a way of honoring the gods and maintaining balance in the world. While the practical aspects of the Chinampas, such as food production and trade, are well documented, it's important to also consider the cultural and spiritual significance they held. The floating gardens were not just a means of subsistence. They were a way of life, embedded in the very fabric of Aztec identity. The Aztecs didn't simply live off the land. They saw themselves as part of it. To them, agriculture was a sacred duty, and the Chinampas were a reflection of their deep connection to the earth. The act of farming, especially the act of farming in such a unique and carefully crafted system, was an acknowledgement of the delicate relationship between humans and the world around them. In this way, the Chinampas can be viewed as a form of ecological stewardship. The Aztecs were not exploiting the land or the resources of Lake Texcoco. Rather, they were working in harmony with the environment, using their knowledge of the natural world to create a sustainable system that benefited both the people and the earth. The floating gardens were a model of how humans can live in balance with nature, cultivating the land without exhausting it, and maintaining harmony between human needs and the health of the ecosystem. Historians and scholars have long been fascinated by the Aztecs' ability to create such a system of agriculture that was not only productive but also sustainable. In contrast to the industrial agriculture that has dominated the modern world, the Chinampas were a low-impact, highly efficient system that prioritized ecological balance and resilience. The fact that the Chinampas were able to support such a large population for centuries without the need for extensive irrigation systems or synthetic fertilizers speaks to the sophistication of the Aztec approach to farming. Today, the concept of ecological stewardship is more relevant than ever as we grapple with issues such as climate change, soil degradation, and water scarcity. The lessons of the Chinampas offer valuable insights into how we can create more sustainable and resilient food systems. The Chinampas were a model of how humans can work with, rather than against, the natural world, and how farming can be a force for environmental preservation rather than degradation. By embracing the principles of ecological balance, crop rotation, and water conservation that the Aztecs employed, modern society can move toward a more sustainable future. The revival of Chinampa farming in certain areas of Mexico is a testament to the enduring legacy of this ancient practice. In regions like Xochimilco, where the floating gardens still exist today, efforts to preserve and expand Chinampa farming offer hope for the future of sustainable agriculture. These efforts show that the wisdom of the past can still inform the present, providing solutions to the environmental challenges we face today. In addition to the ecological lessons that Chinampas offer, there's also a broader social and cultural message. The Chinampas were not just an agricultural practice. They were a communal effort, requiring collaboration and cooperation among the people. The Tlaquilo worked together to build and maintain the floating gardens, sharing knowledge and resources to ensure that the system remained productive. This sense of collective responsibility was a fundamental aspect of Aztec society, where the well-being of the community was always prioritized over individual gain. In today's world, where individualism often takes precedence over community, the Chinampas offer a reminder of the importance of collective action and the power of shared responsibility. In conclusion, the Chinampas were not just an agricultural achievement. They were a profound expression of the Aztec worldview, a model of how humans can live in harmony with the natural world, and a symbol of the importance of balance, cooperation, and ecological stewardship. As we face the challenges of the 21st century, the lessons of the Chinampas are more relevant than ever. By learning from the past and applying its wisdom to the present, we can create a more sustainable and harmonious future, one that respects the earth and all of its inhabitants. As we delve deeper into the significance of the Chinampas, It's important to recognize their role in shaping the Aztecs' relationship with their environment on a more symbolic and spiritual level. For the Aztecs, the very act of cultivating land was more than just a means of survival. It was a deeply sacred task that connected them to the gods and the cycles of the natural world. The Chinampas, as an integral part of the Aztec agricultural system, were not only tools for growing food. They were a living representation of the Aztecs' view of the world as a place of continuous creation, destruction, and renewal. At the heart of the Chinampas was the idea that nature was cyclical. Nothing was ever truly lost or static, but rather, everything in life was part of an ongoing, eternal cycle. Just as the waters of Lake Texcoco rose and fell with the seasons, bringing fertility to the land and washing away the old, the crops on the Chinampas grew, were harvested, and then renewed. The concept of life, death, and rebirth was not just a philosophical or religious idea for the Aztecs. It was a physical, tangible process they saw reflected in the very soil of the Chinampas. In this way, farming was an act of faith, as each crop planted was a gesture of hope for the future, and each harvest was a reminder of the cycles that governed all life. The connection between the Aztecs and their environment was deeply spiritual. Their gods, such as Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility, were believed to control the very elements that made the Chinampas possible. The fertility of the land was seen as a divine gift, one that required reverence and respect in return. Every planting season, every harvest, was a prayer to the gods, an acknowledgement of their power, and a request for continued blessings. By working the Chinampas, the Aztecs were fulfilling their sacred duty to the gods, helping to sustain not only themselves but also the cosmic order that governed the universe. This idea of the Chinampas as a form of spiritual practice is reinforced by the cultural importance of food. For the Aztecs, food was not just sustenance, it was sacred. The crops grown on the Chinampas were not just for the people of Tenochtitlan to eat. They were offerings to the gods, and many times, food would be presented at temples and during religious ceremonies as part of larger ritual acts. The relationship between food and the divine was central to the Aztecs' understanding of their role in the world. The act of farming, particularly through the cultivation of the Chinampas, was seen as an extension of that divine relationship. When the Tlaquilo, the farmers, worked the floating gardens, they were performing a sacred duty that ensured not only the survival of the community, but also the continued favor of the gods. In fact, the Chinampas were often considered to be sacred spaces. The act of building and maintaining them wasn't just about feeding the population. It was about honoring the gods and upholding the divine order. The land that was transformed into Chinampas wasn't just dirt and water. It was an extension of the natural world, infused with spiritual significance. By cultivating the floating gardens, the Aztecs were participating in a sacred process that linked them to the earth, the water, the gods, and the cosmos itself. The floating gardens were a tangible representation of the Aztecs' belief in the cyclical nature of life and the interconnectedness of all things. Today, this spiritual connection to the land is something that many modern agricultural practices have lost sight of. The commercialization of agriculture and the dominance of industrial farming systems have often led to a disconnect between the land and the people who work it. The Aztec practice of Chinampa farming, however, offers a model of sustainable agriculture that honors the earth and acknowledges the importance of spiritual and ecological balance. It serves as a reminder that agriculture isn't just about feeding the body. It's about maintaining a relationship with the land and respecting the cycles of nature that sustain us. The revival of Chinampa farming in places like Xochimilco shows that these ancient agricultural practices are not only relevant in the modern world, but can also provide sustainable solutions to contemporary problems. By using traditional methods to grow food, these efforts to revive Chinampa farming are helping to restore a balance with the environment, promoting sustainability, and fostering a deeper connection to the land. The principles of working with nature, rather than exploiting it, can help guide us as we look for ways to address the environmental challenges we face today. Historians and scholars continue to be fascinated by the spiritual and cultural significance of the Chinampas. Some view them as purely practical, a solution to the need for more food production in an urban environment, while others argue that they were always deeply imbued with spiritual meaning. Regardless of the interpretation, the Chinampas were undoubtedly an expression of the Aztecs' worldview, a worldview that saw nature, society, and spirituality as inseparable. The floating gardens weren't just a means of feeding the population. They were a reflection of the Aztecs' profound understanding of the world as a web of interconnected forces, all of which needed to be respected and maintained. Looking back on the legacy of the Chinampas, we see that they offer more than just an ancient agricultural technique. They offer a blueprint for how we might reconnect with nature in a meaningful way. In a world where our relationship with the earth is increasingly distant, the Chinampas remind us of the power of working in harmony with nature, not only for our own benefit, but for the well-being of future generations. They show us that when we honor the land, when we recognize the sacredness of the natural world, we can create systems that are not only productive but sustainable. Now that we've reflected on the spiritual and ecological significance of the Chinampas, let's turn our focus to how these floating gardens represented the Aztecs' sophisticated understanding of urban planning. Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire, was built on the waters of Lake Texcoco, making it an inherently difficult location for agriculture. The Chinampas were the solution, an ingenious response to the challenges posed by the city's geography. These floating gardens were not only agricultural tools, but also integral to the layout and function of the city itself, contributing to its identity as one of the most advanced urban centers of the ancient world. The design of Tenochtitlan was a testament to the Aztecs' deep understanding of spatial organization and resource management. The city was carefully planned with a series of concentric canals radiating out from the center, forming a grid-like structure that allowed for efficient transportation, water distribution, and, of course, farming. These canals were the lifeblood of the city, providing routes for both trade and irrigation. The Chinampas were situated along the canals, creating a system of floating agricultural islands that not only fed the population, but also helped to define the city's urban landscape. The canals, while functional for transportation and farming, were also essential for the movement of goods throughout the city. In Tenochtitlan's bustling marketplaces, goods flowed in from the Chinampas and other areas, creating a vibrant economy based on the exchange of food, textiles, pottery, and luxury items like cacao. The floating gardens were part of this complex economic system, providing the raw materials that supported the market economy. The ability to produce food in such a compact space allowed for greater specialization in other sectors, including trade and craft production, further strengthening the city's position as a thriving metropolis. The city's urban design was not just about efficiency, it was also symbolic. The Aztecs were deeply attuned to the idea of balance and symmetry in their worldview, and this philosophy was reflected in the layout of Tenochtitlan. The central ceremonial precinct, where the major temples and palaces were located, was surrounded by a series of causeways and canals, all radiating out like spokes on a wheel. This centrality represented the city's importance as the center of the Aztec world, both spiritually and politically. The Chinampas, though they were part of the agricultural fabric of the city, were also a reflection of this idealized balance, combining human innovation with the natural environment in a way that represented the harmony between the two. The Chinampas were, therefore, not just islands of crops. They were integrated into the urban fabric in a way that contributed to the very identity of Tenochtitlan. The floating gardens were the backbone of the city's food supply, but they also contributed to the cultural and spiritual life of the people. The canals and Chinampas allowed for the growth of a rich, complex society, where agriculture, commerce, religion, and art were deeply intertwined. The role of the Chinampas in the functioning of Tenochtitlan highlights the Aztecs' remarkable ability to adapt to their environment. They didn't simply rely on the natural resources available to them, they transformed them using engineering, ingenuity, and a deep respect for nature to create a system that allowed their society to thrive. The floating gardens were a model of sustainable agriculture, showing how humans could shape their environment in a way that was beneficial both to them and to the land. In a way, the Chinampas represented the very essence of Aztec urbanism, where innovation and respect for nature coexisted in perfect balance. It's also worth noting that the Chinampas were a critical element of the Aztec military strategy. The ability to produce food locally and efficiently meant that Tenochtitlan was less reliant on external resources, allowing the city to maintain a strong military presence without the constant need for outside supplies. The floating gardens were not just a symbol of peace and prosperity. They were also an important strategic asset, ensuring that the empire could support its warriors and defend its borders. In this sense, the Chinampas were not only a form of agricultural technology, but also an integral part of the Aztec Empire's military infrastructure. Historians often debate the exact role that the Chinampas played in the military success of the Aztecs. Some argue that the abundance of food provided by the floating gardens allowed the Aztecs to sustain their army and defend Tenochtitlan against external threats. Others suggest that the Chinampas were more of a symbol of the empire's prosperity and technological prowess, rather than a critical factor in military strategy. Regardless, it is clear that the Chinampas were an essential part of the Aztecs' ability to thrive in a challenging environment and to maintain their status as one of the most powerful civilizations in the Americas. Today, the lessons of the Chinampas are particularly relevant as we consider how to build more resilient cities in the face of climate change and population growth. The urban planning of Tenochtitlan offers valuable insights into how we might adapt our cities to make them more sustainable and self-sufficient. The Chinampas provide a model for integrating agriculture into urban spaces in a way that benefits both the environment and the people who live there. In an age where many cities are facing food insecurity and environmental degradation, the legacy of the Chinampas serves as a reminder that it is possible to create urban systems that work in harmony with nature, providing for the needs of the population without compromising the planet's health. The revival of Chinampa farming in parts of Mexico City today shows that these ancient practices are not only relevant but necessary for creating sustainable urban futures. By combining the wisdom of the past with the technologies of the present, we can create cities that are more resilient, more connected to nature, and more capable of supporting future generations. As we continue to delve into the legacy of the Chinampas, it's vital to consider how the system represents a profound shift in our understanding of sustainable farming practices. The floating gardens were not simply a solution to agricultural challenges. They were a pioneering example of ecological innovation, blending human ingenuity with natural systems. By examining the principles behind Chinampa farming, we can uncover insights that could inform how we approach agriculture in the modern world, especially in the face of pressing environmental concerns like climate change, resource depletion, and urban expansion. One of the primary lessons from the Chinampas is the importance of working with, rather than against, nature. The Aztecs didn't seek to alter the natural world. They sought to enhance it, to make the most of the resources available to them. By transforming the shallow lake bed into productive agricultural land, they worked with the natural cycles of water, soil, and plant life. The flooding of the lake was a natural event that the Aztecs understood and harnessed, rather than trying to control or prevent it. This natural fertilization process was key to maintaining the fertility of the soil without the need for synthetic fertilizers. The reliance on organic material and the natural influx of nutrients through the water cycle highlights the sustainability of the Chinampa system. In contrast to modern industrial agriculture, which often relies on chemical inputs, monoculture farming, and heavy machinery, Chinampa farming was deeply rooted in biodiversity and ecological balance. The crops grown on the Chinampas were varied: maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, chili peppers, and even flowers like marigolds. The polyculture approach to farming not only prevented soil depletion, but also helped maintain a healthy ecosystem. By growing different types of crops together, the Aztecs were able to create a resilient farming system that could withstand pests, diseases, and changing environmental conditions. The integration of crops that supported one another, like maize and beans, is a sustainable farming practice that modern agriculture is increasingly rediscovering. Moreover, the Chinampas were a form of agroecology long before the term was coined. Agroecology is an approach to farming that emphasizes the use of local knowledge, the enhancement of natural processes, and the importance of ecological balance. In the case of the Chinampas, the Aztecs worked with the natural environment, ensuring that the soil remained fertile and the crops remained healthy by using water from the lake and maintaining a diverse planting system. The Chinampas weren't just about producing food. They were about creating an entire ecosystem in which the land, water, and crops all work together in a sustainable and mutually beneficial way. One of the key aspects of the Chinampa system was its ability to provide continuous food production. The water in Lake Texcoco allowed for year-round farming, unlike traditional farming methods, which are limited by seasonal cycles. This continuous production helped sustain the rapidly growing population of Tenochtitlan and provided a reliable food source in times of drought or famine. The resilience of the Chinampa system, with its built-in flexibility and ability to adapt to changing conditions, is a key lesson for modern agriculture. As the world faces more frequent and intense weather events due to climate change, developing agricultural systems that can adapt to these shifts is more important than ever. The modern world faces a multitude of challenges that the Chinampas can help us address. With the growing global population, the pressures on our food systems are immense. We need to find ways to produce more food while also conserving resources, reducing environmental damage, and mitigating climate change. The Chinampas provide a model for urban agriculture, one that can integrate food production into cities in ways that reduce food miles, lower carbon footprints, and build local resilience. Reviving and modernizing the Chinampa system could play an important role in addressing urban food insecurity, particularly in cities with limited space for traditional farming. In fact, urban agriculture is increasingly seen as a solution to some of the world's most pressing issues. Cities like Mexico City are already looking to revive the Chinampas as part of their sustainability initiatives. These floating gardens not only provide fresh, local produce, but also contribute to biodiversity, improve water quality, and enhance urban green spaces. The principles behind the Chinampas, working with the land, respecting natural cycles, and fostering community involvement, could offer valuable strategies for modern urban food systems. But the revival of Chinampa farming isn't just about replicating the past. It's about blending ancient wisdom with modern technologies. Today, researchers and practitioners are looking at how to adapt the Chinampa system to contemporary conditions, using innovations in water management, crop diversification, and sustainable practices to increase efficiency and productivity. The goal isn't to return to the past, but to take the best aspects of the Chinampa system and apply them to modern agricultural challenges. In many ways, the revival of the Chinampas reflects a broader shift in the way we think about food production. More and more, people are questioning the sustainability of industrial agriculture and its impact on the environment. The movement toward organic farming, permaculture, and agroecology is gaining momentum as people realize the importance of working with nature to create resilient food systems. The Chinampas, as a model of sustainable agriculture, offer a valuable example of how ancient practices can inform modern solutions. The resilience and ingenuity of the Aztec farming system remind us that there are lessons from the past that can help us build a more sustainable future. As we look to the future, it's important to remember that sustainability isn't just about technological innovation. It's about integrating the lessons we've learned from nature into our systems of food production. The Chinampas teach us that farming can be a harmonious process, one that works with the land and the natural cycles rather than against them. As we face the challenges of feeding a growing population and combating environmental degradation, the lessons of the Chinampas offer a roadmap for a more sustainable and resilient agricultural future. As we reach the final section of our journey through the history and legacy of the Chinampas, it's crucial to reflect on the broader implications of this agricultural system. The Chinampas were not just an innovation for the Aztec Empire. They were a representation of how humans can coexist with their environment, blending nature and human ingenuity to create something that serves both the people and the land. As we look to the future, the lessons of the Chinampas offer us invaluable insights into how we can approach sustainable agriculture in the modern world. The Chinampas were a key example of how ancient societies understood the importance of ecological balance. They did not view the land as something to be conquered or exploited, but rather as something to be respected and nurtured. The Aztecs used the natural resources of the lake, such as its water and mud, to create fertile gardens that provided abundant crops without depleting the land. This approach, grounded in the understanding of cycles and natural processes, is more relevant today than ever before, as the world faces challenges like climate change, soil erosion, and food insecurity. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Chinampas was their ability to produce multiple harvests per year, ensuring a steady and reliable food supply. This continuous production of food is essential in today's world, where traditional farming methods, dependent on seasonal cycles, are increasingly disrupted by unpredictable weather patterns caused by climate change. The Chinampas' adaptability, with their ability to provide year-round crops, demonstrates the potential of regenerative agricultural practices to address the growing demand for food in an era of environmental uncertainty. Another key lesson from the Chinampas is the importance of biodiversity. The Aztecs' use of polyculture, growing a variety of crops together, ensured that the soil remained healthy and that pest problems were kept to a minimum. The integration of different crops, such as maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, and flowers, promoted a balanced ecosystem where plants, insects, and animals all had roles to play. This approach contrasts with the monoculture systems that dominate modern industrial agriculture, which often leads to soil depletion, increased pesticide use, and a loss of biodiversity. The Chinampas also provide a model for how urban farming can be integrated into the fabric of cities. In the Aztec Empire, Tenochtitlan was a bustling metropolis, and the Chinampas were a vital part of its urban design. The canals, floating gardens, and water management systems allowed for efficient transportation, irrigation, and food production, all within the city itself. In the modern world, where many cities face challenges in accessing fresh, local food, the revival of Chinampa-like farming systems could be an important step toward increasing urban food security. By growing food within the city, we can reduce our reliance on long supply chains, decrease carbon emissions, and ensure that fresh produce is accessible to all urban residents. In recent years, there have been efforts to revive Chinampa farming in Mexico City, particularly in areas like Xochimilco, where the ancient system still exists in a modified form. These efforts show that the lessons of the past can be applied to contemporary problems. By adapting Chinampa farming to modern technologies and environmental conditions, we can create more resilient food systems that support local communities and promote sustainability. The Chinampas also offer a model for community-driven agriculture. The work of building and maintaining the floating gardens required collaboration and collective effort. Farmers worked together to manage the land, share resources, and ensure that the system remained productive. This communal approach to farming not only provided food but also fostered social cohesion and a sense of shared responsibility. In today's world, where many communities are disconnected from the land, the Chinampas serve as a reminder of the importance of collective action in creating sustainable food systems. By working together, communities can build resilient, locally supported food systems that benefit everyone. Moreover, the Chinampas were deeply intertwined with the spiritual beliefs of the Aztecs. Agriculture for the Aztecs was not just a practical endeavor, it was a sacred act that connected them to the gods, the earth, and the cosmos. By honoring the natural cycles of life, death, and rebirth, the Aztecs created a food system that was not only sustainable but also aligned with their spiritual values. This deep respect for nature is something that modern agriculture often overlooks. Today, as we face environmental crises, it is essential that we rethink our approach to farming and reconnect with the spiritual and ecological principles that once guided sustainable practices. The legacy of the Chinampas offers hope for the future of agriculture. By embracing the lessons of the past, working in harmony with nature, fostering biodiversity, and promoting community-driven agriculture, we can build food systems that are more resilient, sustainable, and equitable. The Chinampas teach us that food security is not just about increasing production. It's about creating systems that work with the land, that nourish both people and the environment, and that honor the cycles of nature. As we move forward, it is essential that we remember the wisdom of the Aztecs and the Chinampas. By revitalizing traditional farming practices, integrating them with modern technologies, and reimagining how we grow food, we can create a more sustainable future for generations to come. The floating gardens of the Aztecs were not just a technological innovation, they were a testament to the resilience, creativity, and spirituality of a people who understood the deep interconnectedness of all life. The Chinampas offer a glimpse into a future where humans and nature coexist in balance, where our food systems are sustainable, and where we honor the earth as the sacred entity that sustains us all.